And welcome to Newsmax Television. I'm Steve Malsberg, and I'm very proud to say joining us is Texas Senator Ted Cruz. Thank you, Senator.
Steve, great to be with you.
Great to meet you. So let me start at the beginning a little bit here. When you first undertook the Senate run, did you have any idea? Could you have imagined in your wildest dreams that you would become the lightning rod? I think is a fair categorization, a classification of what you have become.
Well, I certainly didn't predict that it would be the whirlwind it has. It really has been a breathtaking year. And I think part of it is the challenges facing our country are extraordinary. And you know, I, for one, feel really privileged, blessed to have the chance to be serving at a time such as this, at a time when the challenges are just so grave.
Now, the media has seized upon you. Probably the only person where they did it quicker that I can recall is Sarah Palin. The second Sarah Palin was chosen as John McCain's running mate, she was a bad mom. She has a young child. How could she do both? I mean, they killed her from the beginning. But you, I mean, you've caught up and surpassed. It might have taken a little longer. But you were on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno, and people saw a side of you. You said something negative about Obamacare. The audience applauded. Yet they call you the most hated man in America, the liberal media. So how would they reconcile something like that? I guess by ignoring the success you had on The Tonight Show, for instance.
Well, I will confess, being on the Tonight Show was a little surreal. When you walk out on the stage with Jay Leno, you're looking around going, what the heck am I doing here? It was very cool, though, because the guest that preceded me was Mariska Hargitay, who's on Law and Order. Sure. And I'm a huge Law and Order fan, so I thought that was very neat. And I was certainly, I was pleasantly surprised by the very warm reaction I got from the studio audience there in Burbank, California.
You know, that Wall Street Journal, NBC News poll where the Democrats claim that's what forced the Republicans to cave. It was a few weeks during the shutdown, and there were negatives in that poll, and both Barack Obama and Harry Reid had higher total negatives than you. But of course, that's something they'll never talk about.
Well, you know, I think there's a real divide between Washington, D.C. and the rest of the country. And I've said a lot of times, I think the biggest divide in this country is not between Republicans and Democrats. It is between entrenched politicians in Washington of both parties and the American people. There are a lot of politicians in Washington who just aren't listening to the American people, and people are frustrated. You take something like Obamacare. Millions of Americans have been speaking up saying, this is a train wreck, this is a disaster, this is killing jobs, this is forcing people into part-time work. And as we've been seeing in the last few weeks, this is taking away the health care of millions of Americans. And yet Washington hasn't been listening to them. And I think that's the frustration people feel all across this country, and that's something I hope will change.
Well, let me ask you, when Bill Clinton said what he said, urging President Obama to, even if he has to change the law, help these people, what did you feel? Did you feel vindication? Did you feel shock? What went through your mind?
Well, I think it was a very revealing comment. That Bill Clinton said that, to me, suggested that maybe he's looking for some distance, and in particular to try to distance Hillary Clinton from both President Obama and Obamacare. And I think that speaks volumes, that this thing isn't working, that nobody is defending it. And that was really a signal to an awful lot of Democrats that the wheels are falling off of this thing, and we've started to see a lot more Democrats finally being willing to break with Obamacare to stop the partisan obstruction they've been engaged in, and to start, I hope, beginning to listen to the American people. 39
of them yesterday in the House. What does that signal to you? And what about that bill? I mean, does that go far enough? What is your ultimate goal is to do away with Obamacare, but can it be piecemeal, so to speak? And of course, the next question is, or the next fact to realize is, Harry Reid's never going to bring this up.
Well, you know, as John Adams said, facts are stubborn things. And the facts are Obamacare isn't working. I mean, it is, at this point, I actually think it is the essence of pragmatism to want to repeal Obamacare, because 3.5 years ago, maybe it was the case that reasonable minds could have differed, that some people might have believed maybe Obamacare would work. Today, nobody believes that. You can't look at the facts. When you've got over 5 million Americans who've had their health insurance canceled because of Obamacare, you've had 100,000 sign up and 5 million lose their health insurance.
Subpar insurance policies from bad apple insurance companies.
Well, you know, as subpar as the president might think they are, even more subpar is not having any insurance when you've been canceled. And it's the classic illustration of liberalism and big government run amok, where people in Washington think they know better than you do about the health care you need, about the health care your family needs. I got to tell you, it is a great reminder of what it is we're fighting for when I go back to Texas, which I try to do every weekend. And all across the state of Texas, I hear Texans who come up to me, and you know, lately, more and more of them, they're scared. They're losing their health care. You know, you've got moms with kids with diabetes, with real health issues. You've got people who are just, they're frightened by what's happening. And what has happened to the Democratic partisanship is it has confronted the reality of the millions of Americans who are paying the price, who are facing real harms because of that.
The navigators. James O'Keefe went undercover first in Texas and revealed that last week. He's got more coming. I just spoke to him today. This should be what Kathleen Sebelius said to John Cornyn about, convicted felons could have access, and then to see these navigators on tape telling people cheat, lie, steal.
Right.
I mean, this should lead the news every single night, and this should be the end of the whole program. But of course, the media doesn't really want to talk about this.
No, that's exactly right. Let me say, God bless James O'Keefe. He does such a terrific job of simply shining the light in darkness, telling the truth. The great thing about what James does is he just runs a camera and lets people explain what they're doing. The navigators, you know, part of the problem with the left is for them it is about power. It is about the power of Washington to control your life, to control my life. And so the navigators are all about using taxpayer money to fund partisan operatives. And that's fundamentally corrupt. It's wrong. It's misusing the machinery of government. And what James has done is simply put on film that these folks understand they're partisan operatives. They're not engaged in anything other than trying to mobilize people to keep Democrats in power, to maintain their control over our lives.
Your eyes don't lie. Let me ask you this. Do you think it would help your cause and the Republicans' cause if you would go, I know you can't do it in the Senate, but if they would pass a bill? How about the 5 things that people like from Obamacare? Portability, you can't, pre-existing condition, close the donut hole, you could keep your kids on the insurance till they're 116, and just say, here's a bill, and pass that, and say, here, 1 sheet of paper, see the other 1,800? Whoosh. Wouldn't that help public perception?
Well, I agree with the philosophy you're talking about, that we should be talking proactively about health care reform to empower patients, to increase choice, to drive down costs and expand affordability and access. And in my view, right now we're at an interesting time because the Democrats are scrambling. They're like fleeing a sinking ship. And you see Democrats, what they're desperately looking for is right now not a way to fix the problem. They're just looking for a political Band-Aid. They're looking for something to cover their political rear ends, but frankly, they don't make a big enough Band-Aid to do that.
Right.
And so you're seeing all of these bills that the White House is pushing, the Democrats are pushing, that have clever titles, things like, if you like your plan, you can really, 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 really keep it.
For a year.
For a year.
Yeah, and then you're back in the same boat, yeah.
But none of these are going to work.
Yeah.
This thing is fundamentally broken, and tinkering around the edges, sticking a Band-Aid on it's not going to fix the problem. The solution is to repeal it. Repeal it outright, to say, listen, it isn't working. As a simple, pragmatic, reasonable starting point, let's start over. And then what we ought to work on doing is reforming health care so that we expand competition. The first step we ought to take is allowing people to purchase health insurance across state lines. Create a national marketplace. What that does is it drives down cost and it increases choice.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that's really at its very core most messed up about Obamacare is that it drives up cost. If you want to expand access, you want to drive costs down. Obamacare goes the other way. It drives up costs and reduces choice. The way to expand access is expand choice and drive down costs. That's what, as conservatives, we need to be talking about, is empowering you, not bureaucrats getting between you and your doctor.
And I love when he says you could buy a policy for your cell phone. The deductible on some of these policies, people won't even go to the doctor because they got to pay the first $5,000, $6,000, $7,000.
Right.
Let me switch. I know you've been outspoken. I think you spoke just the other night about the fact that the abuse of power or the power grab by this administration, changing the law, changing the health care law, DOMA, the welfare, loosening up the must-work provision. But there have been 9 times when the U.S. Supreme Court has unanimously turned down Justice Department arguments. I know you've cited 3, but talk about, for time constraints, concerns, talk about the freedom of religion when it comes to businesses.
Yeah. Well, the question you raise is a very important one. It's one of the most troubling aspects of the Obama administration is, aside from their radical policy, the way they've implemented it has sadly been lawless. Over and over again, this president has said, I don't care what the law is, I'm going to refuse to enforce it. And so we saw that with respect to immigration, when he said, I'm not going to enforce the immigration laws against certain individuals. We saw that with the drug laws, where he said, I'm just going to pretend these laws don't exist and not enforce them. We've seen it with Obamacare, where provision after provision, he says, for big business, I'm not going to enforce it against them for a year. For members of Congress, even though Obamacare applies to members of Congress, I, President Obama, I'm going to refuse to enforce the law. And now, most strikingly, just last week, in response to 5 million people losing their insurance and more getting ready to lose their
Changes
insurance,
it again.
he simply says, fine, we won't enforce that part of the law.
Unconstitutional?
It's completely
Impeachable?
unconstitutional. You know, Article 2 of the Constitution gives the president a responsibility to, quote, take care that the laws be faithfully executed. We have never seen a president behave like President Obama, who believes he can just pick and choose. He'll enforce this law, not enforce another law. I mean, that is
impeachable,
deeply dangerous. You know, that's a question for the House, ultimately. The House, under the Constitution, makes the decision whether to impeach,
right.
And then the Senate is charged with trying it. So that's a question for the House to assess.
Would you urge them to consider it?
You know, any impeachment would have to be tried in the United States Senate. Mm-hmm. So since my responsibility would be to render judgment, I would not want to urge the House to do anything other than exercise its best judgment, and then I would endeavor to do the same on my end.
Now, I know and I believe you when you say you're serving the people of Texas. You're a year or so into this whole thing, and I know Barack Obama got some criticism for just getting elected to the Senate and then running for president, and I don't compare you to him in any way. Don't get me wrong, but you have to have national aspiration. I mean, you have to. This is now in your blood, and you have become, like I said, the lightning rod. For some don't like you, and many love you. So, is the presidency something you will one day consider? Not today, maybe not in 2016, but will you consider that?
Well, look, I appreciate the question. It's a kind question, and I understand the instincts to focus on politics, focus on the next elections. I'm trying very hard to keep my focus on the substance. I think the challenges facing our country are enormous. I don't think we're at a typical time. We're facing a fiscal and economic cliff that is bankrupting this country.
But who better than the chief executive to get us out of the mess?
Well, what I can tell you is 2 things. Number one, I think the Senate is the battlefield right now, and my focus is on the U.S. Senate, on standing up and fight to pull us back from that fiscal and economic cliff, to get back to free market principles and get back to the Constitution. And number 2, I think our window to turn this country around is short, and I am committed to doing everything I can to helping energize and mobilize the grassroots. The answers are not going to come from Washington. The way we're going to turn this country around is to see millions of Americans standing up saying, there's a better way. We want to get back to the foundations of our country. I think where we are now is very, very similar to the late 1970s. Late 1970s, we had Jimmy Carter years, terrible economy, double-digit unemployment, 22% interest rates, a feckless foreign policy. And yet what we saw all across this country was a grassroots movement, the Reagan Revolution, where millions of men and women, individual citizens, said, there is a better way, let's get back to the principles this country was founded on. I think we're at a very similar moment in time, and so I'm committed to doing everything I can to encourage that. We've launched a national website called MakeDCListen.org, MakeDCListen.org. It provides a portal for people to go and upload their stories about Obamacare. You can either type it in or you can get on your iPhone and record something and tell about how Obamacare impacted your job, your family, your health care, your life, because I think stories are powerful. Too many Republicans argue like accountants, cerebrally, instead of saying, these are real people suffering real harm from real messed up government policies.
Do what the Democrats do.
That's exactly.
They have good tactics, unfortunately. One more, quickly. The Senate's the battlefield. Will you guys take back the Senate in 2014?
I believe we can and should. I think the terrain is very, very favorable to it. And the biggest determinant in terms of whether or not Republicans take the Senate in 2014 is if we stand for principle. If Republicans stand strong, present a clear alternative, stand for free market principles in the Constitution, stand strong against Obamacare, I think we'll take the Senate by a significant margin. If we roll over, if we don't stand for anything, that's the easiest way not to take the Senate.
Senator, thank you so much. Really a pleasure. Really a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Senator Ted Cruz, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for watching Newsmax Television. I'm Steve Malzberg.